So we're going to start in about a minute. Everyone sits down. Okay, so thank you very much for coming to this week's debate on the motion that this House believes that Obama has failed in delivering on his election promises. I'm first going to talk through the speakers that we have this week, and then we're going to start the debate, but also explain what else is going on in the society. We've got a couple of announcements for you today, and I'm also going to explain a little bit about how the format of the debate works. So this week, I'm sharing instead of Thas, our president, because Thas is speaking. So in proposition, we have Jordan Anderson. Jordan works as a country risk analysis, forecasting political, security, and business environments, specializing in Central Africa. He holds an MA with distinction in intelligence and international security from King's College London. And Jordan is the winner of 16 debating competitions and reached the semifinals in the World Universities Debating Championship. Then we have Ben Harris-Queenie. Ben has been involved in politics and international relations for over a decade, having worked in foreign policy in both the UK and the European Parliament. He's also advised in the US, Spanish, and Chilean governments on security and foreign policy issues, as well as opposition parties in Bahrain, Albania, Sri Lanka, Cuba, Venezuela, and Bolivia. In 2010, he received the US Leadership Institute's Global Leadership Award, and in 2014, he was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. I would like you to welcome the proposition speakers here tonight. Okay, so in opposition, we have some very familiar faces. We have Surya Kumarabul, and Surya is a second-year UCL student studying law and the treasurer of the UCL Youth Debating Society. He's a regular speaker and judge at debating competitions and has what is most politely described as a keen interest in US politics, and specifically how it compares to other democracies around the world. And then we have Thas Thurgood, our president. He's a third-year UCL student studying electronics and electrical engineering, and the president of 2015-2016 Society. He's an active UK Labour Party member and has won and lost hundreds of pounds betting on US politics. And I would like you to welcome them here tonight. Okay, so we have two announcements for you guys today. First of all, it's a really, really important one. We organize every year an inter-varsity competition at UCL. And this year, our debate competition is taking place on the 11th, 12th, and 13th of March. And as well as competing to that, if you come to the workshops, etc., we also really, really need people to crash, which means having other people that are coming from other universities debating at our university, sleep those couple of nights at their places. At the moment, we're still looking for places to sleep for 80 people. So it'd be really, really good if any of you have places to offer and would like to meet more debating people from around the UK and even from the rest of Europe. So what you can do is go to the UCLU Debating Society Facebook page, and on there there'll be a link to the Google form. And if you can do that, that'd be amazing. And I think you get free breakfast and drinks or whatever you want if you do that for us. So please do that. And then besides from that, we have Conrad doing an announcement on our volunteering program.
And also Celia. Okay, so two very important things. First thing, next Monday, the 15th of February, we'll be hosting a schools workshop for about 20 to 30 kids from around London and, greater London area. To make it happen and to make sure that it, runs as smoothly as possible, we need as many swing speakers and volunteers and judges as we're able to get. It will be lots of great fun. You'll end up spending a very exciting day with lots of very excited kids who love debating, and will fill your heart with joy and pleasure. And we hope that if you like joy and pleasure and also debating, that you sign up. There's a Google Doc that we linked on the event page and also on the UCU Debating Society group, and that we will also very soon post on the Twitter feed. I actually want Aidan to accept the tweet and just make it appear here any second, because I have sent them a while ago. Anyway, Aidan. So anyway, do come, help us out on Monday. It will be great fun. Please sign up.
There's also food. We offer lunch.
We offer lunch.
Yes. Also, So if you can't make next Monday, but you still want to judge and to help out with kids and such, we have the Schools Cup that's happening on the 5th of March. That's the first Saturday of March. And we would absolutely love if you also were to come to either A, judge, B, volunteer, or C, be a swing speaker. That'd be awesome, and we would love to hear back from you. The link will also be on Facebook, and we will be tweeting that and like spamming Facebook. So please help.
It will be a very exciting tournament with teams not only coming from the UK, but also Europe, including a school from Greece. So it should be really, really fun. I am sure that you're all very, very excited that you'll all come help us out. Thanks for listening. See you at our workshops. Thanks.
Okay, so before we start, I'd like to mention that if you do not have the permission from either any of our speakers, you cannot actually record the debate. We are going to stream it live on YouTube, and you can rewatch it when you're home if you want to do that. But you can't actually record it if you don't have the permission, and the same goes for the floor speeches later on. But aside from that, there's still wine upstairs, I think, so if you want to go get that before the actual debate starts, or if you are really, really thirsty throughout the debate, just go in between the speeches so you don't actually disturb the people speaking. Okay, so the format of the debate. I know lots of you come every Monday, so you kind of know, but for the people that haven't actually been here before, each speaker gets 7 minutes to speak. After 1 minute, Alice, our publicity officer, will bang the gavel, like that. And then everyone after that minute, which is predicted time, everyone can offer a point of information or POI. And that's kind of used if you don't understand something about their speech or if you want to offer an argument against them, but it has to be very short, so max about 10 seconds. So usually people accept 1 or 2, but they can also decline, so they can ask you to sit down again. It's up to them. And at 6 minutes, Alice will bang again. And that means that there's again a minute of protected time. You can't actually offer any POIs. And after that, she'll bang at 7 minutes, which is to indicate that that their time of the speaker's time is over, and then they'll have 15 seconds roundabout to finish up their speech. And then if they don't finish up their speech, Alice will get really angry about more. Besides from that, after our 4 main speeches, so first proposition and opposition, first opposition, proposition speaker, opposition speaker, second proposition speaker, and second opposition speaker, we'll have 3 rounds of floor speeches from you guys. So they'll be about 3 minutes in length, but you don't have to do them 3 minutes. You can do 1 short statement or a minute and a half, but it's completely up to you. And we'll have 3 rounds of proposition speakers, so people that think that Obama has failed, and then 3 rounds, and then opposition speeches. We think that Obama hasn't failed, and then abstention. So if you want to speak an abstention, that basically means that you aren't sure, you haven't been convinced by either party, or there's things that prevent you from making up your mind. But do remember that you don't have to have 3 minutes full of speech, but Alice is going to bang after 30 seconds, and then POIs can be offered again, and she's going to bang again at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You're doing very well. And that means that there's no time for POIs, and at 3 minutes she'll bang twice, and then the speaker needs to wrap up their speech. And at the end of the night, we'll have a prize for the best floor speech, so do come down, and while our 4 main speeches are going on, try and think of something and prepare something, because you can win either a bottle of port, which is good, or a box of chocolates, and they're really good, so please do that. And besides from that, we will have, afterwards, we'll have summary speeches from each of our speakers. So everyone, starting with the opposition side of the debate, is able to speak for 3 minutes, and Alice will bang after 3 minutes to indicate that we'll move on to the next speaker, which is also on opposition side, and then we'll move on to the proposition side, and each speaker will get 3 minutes as well. So before we do that, we want to see how you guys feel about this motion and about the subject before you've actually heard from our speakers, so before they've been able to influence your ideas. So if I could get my volunteers up here and count the votes. And then after the debate, we'll vote again to see whether anybody's changed their minds or anybody feels completely different about the subject. Okay, so On the motion that this House believes that Obama has failed in delivering his election promises, who feels that they are in proposition of this motion? You guys got that? Yeah. Okay. So who thinks that they are in opposition of the motion, so they don't feel like Obama has failed? Okay. So finally, everybody that is in abstention, so doesn't quite know how they feel yet, but wants to go from my speakers. All right, thanks, guys. So before we start, I would like to remind everyone that after the debate we are having a social at the bar at TCR, but I'll remind you guys when we start. And there's also, which I was always going to forget, there's also a possibility to tweet at use no hashtag, I don't know how it works, I know Twitter. Hashtag UCLU debating, and if you tweet it, something about the motion or responding to our speakers or just on how you feel, our moderators can either put it on or not put it on, so kind of think about what you said, don't be too rude, but it'll actually show up here, and hopefully I won't be standing in front of it too much. But so please do that, and that's all I think. So no, it's not all thing. What microphone? Your microphone. Okay. Okay. So before we start, now we start. I would like to call the first speaker, please, in proposition of the motion, and that is who of you? Who's going to start speaking first?
I'll go.
Okay, awesome. So first speaker of proposition, please, Ben Harris.
Well, I really do enjoy coming to UCL to debates. I always find your interruptions to be high quality. It's not Oxbridge, obviously, but it is competitive. Last time I was here, actually, I was here to watch the debate, not to take part in one. And much as I appreciated many of the comments made, including from the chap who won the non-strawberry chocolates, I said to one of the organisers, don't the audience ever get tired of voting left every single time, knowing as they do that the daunting reality of the world lies outside these walls? And they said to me, it's hard for me too at the union because I'm a Clinton supporter, and that's seen as being too right-wing. Well, that's true, and I think from much of what we've seen from campuses across the Western world, it may well be true. But once it's not clear whether I'm on the left or the right of the debate tonight. And therefore, I think that's the crux of the issue. I have two quotes. It's too late for establishment policies. It's too late for establishment politics. It's too late for establishment economics. We need some new thinking. And not being liked within the establishment isn't a flaw, it's a badge of honour. The establishment won't be picking the candidate, the American people will. One is from GOP candidate Ted Cruz, the other is from Democratic candidate Bernie Sanders. I won't tell you which one was which, because it doesn't matter. Both recognise the system is broken and has been broken for a long time. And rather than facing it, Obama has become the poster boy for it. Hope and change you can believe in. I bet many of you were foolish enough to believe that when he said it. Don't feel bad. He managed to trick the board of the Nobel Prize Committee too. People always ask, the world owes 280 trillion to who? The answer before Obama took office was to our children. The answer, if he leaves office, is to our great-grandchildren. The United States has over 19 trillion in debt, a figure that has nearly doubled since Obama became president. National debt to GDP is at a ratio of 104%. That's pretty much exactly where Greece was going into the 2008 economic crisis. Now, that would all be okay if it fixed the problem. But if there's another recession, and there will be, the US government, and therefore the world, will not be in any position to offer the bailouts and quantitative easing on the same scale of the last economic crisis. And the economic fallout from that will be apocalyptic. He is simply delayed, and worsened the inevitable. Income inequality is higher under Obama than the great George W. Bush, who declared the 1% to be his base. An issue that Obama bizarrely bemoaned in his final State of the Union, despite pledging to fix it in his 2008 election address. If you're black in America, today you have a 30% chance of ending up in prison. At any one time, there are 800,000 black people in prison in the United States. Black unemployment is more than 10%, double the national average. An anecdotal point.
Is the President of the United States a dictator, or are they limited in what they can do?
Well, of course, they're limited, but Obama has also made some very clear pledges, which I believe he hasn't met. And I make an anecdotal point. I spend about 3 months a year in America for the benefit of the immigration authorities. And I've honestly never seen America more divided, more obsessed with race, more angry. And it frightens me because I think that brand of identity politics is coming here. And there's no reason that Obama should have made racial issues or black people's lives in America a priority. But he said that he did. I don't think he's done anything to solve the many crises that they face. What about gay rights, you might say? Well, I opposed the same-sex marriage bill in the UK on the grounds that I felt it was a good time for the state to get out of marriage. In the US, what happened, I think, was a terrible trouncing of the democratic process. But whatever your view on the legislation of same-sex marriage across the US, it didn't come from Obama. It came from a test case heard by the US Supreme Court, who gave a divided decision and passed it by a slender vote. Obama may have got the rainbow lights out, but that's about all he did. Despite, of course, making it very clear before his election, as well as Clinton, that marriage was a sacred institution between a man and a woman, never to be changed. On foreign policy, you can take, I think, a policy of rugged individualism, like that which is promoted by Ron and Rand Paul, or you can take a hawkish Reaganite peace through threat approach. But what you can't do is fumble on the world stage, and that is what Obama has done. The biggest thing I think Obama has failed to do, however, is his failure to take on corporatism. The too big to fail crowd has had him on a leash for his entire presidency. And whether you're on the right or the left, I think that we stubborn ideologues have come to recognise that the heart of the problem is the establishment elites and corporate interests. And until that changes, nothing will. You were promised hope and change. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you 20 trillion in debt, a poorly stitched reconfiguration of the economic bubble that burst in 2008 and will burst again, and the coup de grace of Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton to solve it. Thank you.
for that great speech. I would now like to call the second speaker, the first speaker of opposition, please. By the way, just a small note, I have got absolutely no idea what's going on with the screen. The last thing I am is technical, so if anybody can fix it in this room, but I can't. So for the moment, we have to do without the Twitter feed, but you can actually, if you go on Twitter, you can follow whatever's going on there and debate on Twitter Live.
Cool. Looks like you'll have to listen to me then. I do not envy you. Right, so this is a debate about whether Obama failed on his election promises. If we're going to talk about this, politicians making or not making promises, I think we need to think about how politicians do that and what promise means. All politicians will break at least one of their election pledges, because when they get into power, they recognize the realities of the system. They come up against entrenched interests they've never come to see before. The situation changes such that they can't do things. So when we're assessing whether Obama's met his pledges, I think we should think about how far he's met them, whether he's met the majority of them. Has he managed to do things differently, to change the country? Has he gone full Clegg? That's what the debate should be about, not whether he's broken a single promise. You're going to hear some single promises he might have not been able to make for reasons, but there's a lot which he has been able to make. Because he was elected with a great deal of promises made. He was elected on hope and change, on a complete reworking of everything about it. And then he was dropped straight in the Great Depression. No, thank you. The Great Recession, sorry. This was the 1930s. That, as anyone here from the UK might know, has defined the political discussion in much of the West for 8 years. It's all been about cutting costs. It's all been about getting the economy back on track. Obama promised a whole lot of things, but when he was put in power, the realities of the situation meant that he had to instead turn his attention to saving the country. Which means that one of the first big things he did was pass an enormous stimulus act, which accomplished many of the goals of the promises that he made anyway, but he had to expend enormous amounts of political capital on managing to get this through, managing to save the auto industry in America, and that means that there are a few things he was able to do, not because he didn't want to, not because they won't happen, but because there were greater things to do. You don't call someone a promise breaker if they have to do something more important. If someone says, I promise I'll bring some wine over to your house, and then I'm going to save a friend from an anaphylactic shock, you know, so you break your promise. You say, very well done, you've done something better. What Obama has done has been in some ways constrained by the crisis. A second way he's been constrained is by Republican obstruction of his ideals. Everyone will...
So on that.
Sure, why not? Yeah.
Okay, so the Democrats had sole and total control of both houses of Congress from 2008 until 2010. That means he didn't need them.
I'm actually really happy you asked that, and luckily because I read an article about it just today, talking about the fallacy of the idea that Obama somehow controlled the whole system for many, many years. What was actually happening is that in America, in order to pass meaningful legislation, you need what's called a supermajority in the Senate. You need 60 votes in the Senate. For a massive period of Obama's first term, the Senate was staffed by people who were ailing and ill, like Ted Kennedy, suffering from extreme cancers, by blue dog Democrats, or very moderate people who often voted with the Republicans. The reality of the situation was that he was prevented doing many things by Republicans and their allies, and the fact that people were ill. He only had full control, no thank you, of the houses of Congress for about 4 months and 1 day. And he spent those months doing a really big election promise, Obamacare. With that, he kept dozens of things he promised to do, forcing insurance companies to pay for pre-existing conditions, making large corporations pay for a national system of healthcare to get everyone able to access at least something, and making sure that people can access healthcare as far as he could do, acting against an enormous amount of Republican obstruction, getting back to my point. When he was elected, when people in the Republican establishment heard about his hope and change message, the House majority whip, Eric Cantor, and the minority leader in the Senate, McConnell, both met and pledged that he would have no honeymoon period. He would be unable to get anything done. A former Republican senator has said, if he was for it, we had to be against it. Again, I make a comparison to a normal life. Has someone broken a promise if they literally can't do it? If someone says, I'll bring some wine over, and they're mugged in the street, you don't text them and you go, oh, what are you doing? You broke a promise, I need that wine. You say, I'm really sorry, I hope you can do it next time. I hope you can get better. The Republicans filibustered nearly everything against them. The Republicans shut down everything Obama was trying to do. They literally shut down the government for a large period in 2013 because he was just trying to fulfill a few of his promises in getting Obamacare through. Maybe he should have come to Washington with a different way of looking at things. Maybe he shouldn't have tried the bipartisan message. Maybe he should have gone fully fledged into making executive actions, like his method of getting things done, as Clinton is now promising to do. But one of his main promises was that he would change the way Washington worked, that he would work with everyone, that he would have a real open change agenda through enabling Congress to work for the people. He wasn't unable to do that. People stopped him doing it. He tried to do it. He was unable to, not because of his own fault, so he did not break that promise. You don't break a promise if someone prevents you from doing something. So, yeah, sure.
I don't make promises if I can foresee this outside of my sphere of influence. Are you telling me that Obama was unaware of how Congress worked at the point when he ran for office and therefore was unable to tailor his promises to that reality?
I'm telling you, the American public are suckers, the UK public is suckers. If you want to get to a position of power, you need to promise things you can't do. You need to go beyond the potential, which is why I introduced this idea that in assessing someone's achievements and someone's promises, you think, how much of what they could have done have they done? Obama actually recognized this and thought that people deserve to know. In 2012, his election promises, perhaps the things we should be talking about, were much more conservative, much more realistic. They're about keeping on the road to recovery, not about change, because he recognized that he couldn't do it, because he was stopped, because there were other things to deal with. Those are his new promises. Those are the promises he's managed to keep by getting American employment down to one of the lowest levels ever, by getting American growth up, by keeping the auto industry alive, by doing all these things which made the world a livable place in ways that could eventually lead to his promises being fulfilled. Because that's my last point. He has kept these promises alive. He's gone as far as he can, and he's left the way clear for a Clinton, a Sanders, or even a Rubio to follow through and make sure that the American people get what they deserve and get what they were promised. I tell you, it's known that no one can keep all their promises. Obama was fighting the winds of the economy, the cold water of the realities of governance, and enduring the outright attacks of massive amounts of people unwilling to accept his mandate. But he did a hell of a lot, he broke few, he did many, and he kept the dream and his general vision alive. You don't call someone a promise breaker if they're unable to do it, or if they have to do something better. If they've kept lots of their promises, you say, thank you for keeping those, and so I urge you to vote on. Thank you.
Thanks for that wonderful speech to us. I would now like to call the second speaker in proposition. Oh, where's the speaker's gone back up? That's great. Second speaker of proposition, please, Jordan. Never mind.
It's called building suspense. Okay. Listening to the last speaker, I don't know if anyone in this room has seen the film Four Lions. I remember of a moment in it where the police, when trying to explain why they missed the suicide bomber and actually killed someone else, the spokesman explains it's very, very clear. The police shot the right man, but the wrong man blew up. And that reminds me a little bit of what we've heard. Because apparently, we're an upside down world, or we're a backwards world, and breaking all your promises means keeping your promises alive so that one day Marco Rubio from the other party can fill in for it. It's unclear to me how exactly this is all meant to work, and how right and how it's wrong. What I want to talk you through today is I just want to talk you through what I think are his 10 biggest promises. To an extent, this is subjective. I think I'm going to pick ones you've all hopefully heard of, or ones that seem very important. I'm going to tell them to you, but then I'm going to pause for a second. You're going to ask yourselves, do I think that has happened? And then I'm going to tell you the answer is no. So we're going to go through
each of them like that. But so just this idea that we've had of them, so they say, well, you can't go and keep all their promises. I mean, that is true. On proposition, we were never going to get up and say, Obama promised to cut interest rates by 0.25%, and he in fact only cut them by 0.15. Therefore, we win this debate. But that isn't what we're going to do. But what we do think on this side is that you do not set yourself up for promises you don't think you can keep, and then get to turn around and claim that you kept your promises, which is what the opposition is telling us today. We think, as Martin points out, that Obama did vaguely understand how American politics worked before he became president. In fact, he was a constitutional law scholar. So he has no excuse for not knowing how it works, how the division of power works, and exactly what powers he had as president and what powers depended on other people being willing to work with him, and how likely that was going to be. We think that when one politician lies, essentially, makes promises they know they can deliver on, that then disappoints the public, which means in order to get the public excited again next time, the next guy has to tell even bigger lies, and the next one has to tell even bigger lies, until we get Bernie Sanders, who it's not even clear how he thinks he's going to get to some of his promises. He keeps saying political revolution, and just doesn't have any reasons beyond that. I'm sorry if you like Sanders, but he doesn't really have an explanation. And this is the problem that Obama's perpetuating, and part of why it's a bad thing when politicians don't keep their promises. We think it's worth bearing in mind what they say about Obama's first 2 years is a lie. Obama had complete control of the House of Representatives, where all you need is a majority, and he had at least 59, if not 60 senators in the Senate, which is enough to beat the filibuster for his first 2 years. Yes, Ted Kennedy was sometimes ill. You know what? There were 2 Republican senators who were over 100 years old. They were ill at times. This isn't to say that Obama somehow couldn't pass these laws, but rather he failed to do so. He failed to bring his own party together. As Gus pointed out, he couldn't even bring moderate Democrats with him. That is not Republican intransigence, where the Republicans being determined to destroy him. That is Obama's inability to work with his own party and deliver on his own promises. We think that it does matter when you break your promises, because promises are what the public votes on. If the public cannot believe you in what you say, you are lying to them, and democracy is flawed. And democracy isn't taking place. The politicians are telling them one thing, and they think they're voting for it, and they're getting another one. That's another reason why you should think that promises matter. So, just one point of reply before we move on then. There's this idea that Obama needed to do the stimulus, right? And that was his whole first 2 years, right? So, firstly, he knew he would need to do the stimulus when he came in. So he came in with a plan, like the economic crisis was during the campaign. Secondly, it does not take 2 years to pass a stimulus bill. He did not run out of time. Thirdly, the stimulus bill didn't actually do what it said it did. Obama promised the stimulus bill would keep unemployment under 8%. It probably went up to 12% and stayed that way until 2012. So even the stimulus bill that they're so keen on did not deliver on Obama's promises. But moving on to some more specific ones as we go through. Because one of the key things that Obama promised, and this is something called Pick Alice, was that he promised to turn the page on the ugly partisanship in Washington, so we can bring Democrats and Republicans together to pass an agenda that works for the American people. Take a second to ask yourself, how has that occurred? So Obama there made a promise that he would work with Republicans, that he would get along with them and pass laws. And Obama knew he could never deliver on that promise. Obama, when you look at his voting record from when he was in the Illinois state legislature and when he was in the Senate, was one of the most partisan senators who almost never voted with the other side when he was in office himself. It's unclear as to why he thought he could bring the two parties together, why he thought that was something that he could promise. But also note that Obama never even tried to work with the other side. In 2008, he gave a speech where he said his opponents are people who cling to guns, and cling to religion, and cling to their anti-immigrant sentiment. That was how he characterized the people who he then expected to turn around, okay, go, and work with him.
Given that, as I said, there were secret meetings happening before Obama was elected, saying we are going to let him do nothing, how does that sound like people receptive to getting stuff done? What should he have done?
Firstly, he shouldn't have made speeches like that. Secondly, he shouldn't have continued to make speeches where, for example, he calls his opponents in Washington on the Iran deal crazies. Many of these people have legitimate concerns about the sanctions deal, whether you agree with it or not. The fact that he described them as crazies, or as people who cling to guns and cling to religion to rationality, means he wasn't trying to work with them. Rather, he was trying to do what he did in the Senate, what he did in the Illinois House of Legislature. He was playing to his own base without really attempting to work with the other side. Look at pass Obamacare. He had to essentially bribe his own senators with Medicare packages for their states because he couldn't get them to come along otherwise. He was terrible at getting anyone to work with him. But if we move past the fact that he promised to reconcile with Republicans, knowing he probably couldn't, and that it was a lie because he hardened that, we look at the fact that he said, we look at Obamacare. Two promises he made about Obamacare. Firstly, if you like your healthcare plan, you can keep it. This is PolitiFact's lie of the year in 2013, when 4 million Americans got their healthcare packages canceled under Obamacare. Whether or not you think that was a good or a bad thing, the way he sold it to the American people was he told them that it wouldn't affect anyone who already had healthcare insurance, whereas millions of people saw the insurance that they had and that they liked canceled. In fact, Obama admitted this wasn't true in November 2013. He admitted it was a lie. Secondly, he said the universal healthcare bill would lower healthcare premium costs for all families by at least $2,500. Note that the cost of those premiums have actually gone up under Obamacare. People had to switch to more expensive packages. Obamacare, even if he kept his promise by passing a law, it wasn't the law he promised, and he essentially didn't fulfill his promise in that area. Thirdly, then, we want to note that he promised to close the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center. Note, it is still open. Note, yes, the number of people in it has decreased. The number of people in it decreased under Bush. So Bush kept that promise as much as Obama did, and it is going to continue to remain open when he leaves the presidency. In fact, he has made it harder for it to be closed. For all these reasons, you shouldn't think that Obama has fulfilled his promises, and you shouldn't think that not fulfilling promises matters, because it does.
Thanks, Jordan, for that wonderful speech. I would now like to call Surya for the last main speech of this evening to finish the debate for opposition side.
Okay, so when you're assessing this debate, you've got to assess it in the way that we would assess any other president, which is, given the circumstances that they were in, have they done the best they can to fulfill as many or as much of the promises as they promised? This is basically what Costa told you. Costa also told you exactly what Jordan did in his speech, which is to point to a list of things that Obama has failed to meet as adequately as he promised before he was in office, and say that that is enough to win the debate on his side. It's not, because you don't do that with any other president. You certainly shouldn't do it here. You should say, has he done the best he could do? If that means compromising on some promises, then that is still the best that he could do, and therefore he still kept his promises to the best of his ability. That is what the metric should be. So, what did Obama do? Obama recognized his limitations. There are quite a few limitations. All presidents have limitations. Obama had a few extra ones that most others didn't. What were these? One of them was ideological. The fact that Obama came in after President Bush and one of his central promises was to end the Iraq War, maybe seemed quite diametrically opposed to Bush before. That was helpful in getting him elected in terms of his own base. But also meant that a lot of people in the country felt that he was just ideologically completely different to them. That had an effect on the way the media reported things that he did. That had an effect on the way the Republicans approached him, as we recognize, when they had meetings and said, our first priority shouldn't be governing or doing what our constituents wanted best, but the Republicans said, making sure Obama doesn't have any wins that he could point to and get reelected. That was what they said they would do. Another issue that Obama had, kind of the elephant in the room, is the fact that he was, the first African-American president that the Americas had. The reason why that's significant isn't because of the fact that, there's everyone in America was racist. It was the fact that there were certain preconceptions people had about his stances on certain views, like policing, which meant that whenever he did take stances on these views, it was seen as partisan politics coming from an identity form, and therefore we shouldn't support him because he's doing identity-based politics, that he's not trying to support the best interests of people. Finally, the last thing that was like an extra restriction that he had against other people was the economic crisis that we talked about earlier. Why does this matter? This matters because we then have to assess the reaction that Obama had to these restrictions that were imposed upon him, right? How did he respond and adapt to these problems? Let's take some of the examples that we've heard from the other side, like Guantanamo Bay, because that's the first one I can remember. So when he says that we didn't close Guantanamo Bay, that was kind of because of the fact that, as has already been pointed out, the Republicans said, we're not going to make sure he gets any wins, and forced him to sign a bill. In fact, put a budget on, held a budget to ransom on the idea of closing Guantanamo Bay. So how did Obama respond? Instead, he signed the bill because he had to make sure that there was a budget that was passed. But instead, released as many prisoners as he could from Guantanamo Bay. Bush released a few. Obama released 147. That's quite a lot of people in Guantanamo Bay. So he's like, okay, I'm not able to pass a policy in the way I wanted to, But considering the restrictions I've had upon me, I'm going to do the next best thing and make sure there's as few people in there as possible, meaning that I kept my promise as well as possible. We heard about the fact that there were greater social divides in the country now than there were before. But that's probably not down to Obama, but rather responses due to the restrictions that I talked about, where people felt he was diametrically opposed to them, and therefore they had to oppose everything he did. And it's probably a good thing if rather than just not doing anything at all, he tried to do as much as possible, even if that cost a bit more of a no. Then let's talk about the black community, right? So we've heard that he's done absolutely nothing for the black community. But notice that if he wants to come out and explicitly talk about it whenever, like I don't even have to give you a hypothetical. Every time he's come out and talked about the black community, people have always rolled their eyes and gone, well, of course he's going to say that. Of course he's going to take the side of Trayvon Martin. There's definitely nothing that he would ever say in defense of the police, and therefore we're not going to listen to what he said. But what has he done to help them in an implicit way that has had real, tangible benefits on the black community, in which in a way no other president really has? Well, first of all, he set up an initiative to improve community outreach in policing. This had two major parts to it. One was making sure that the data between police agencies was shared more openly, which meant that every time there were abuses, it was a lot easier to find them and a lot easier with community members in a way that led to more reconciliation than before. These aren't things you hear in the newspapers because they're not like sexy things that you can say that he's done that are really important. But there are things that he has done. Other things he's done is stop the amount of foreclosures that people have had, specifically in areas like New Orleans, which has a large African American community, and help them get loans when no one else was lending to them, and meant that these guys had to go on the streets. These were promises that he made, and he kept to the best of his ability, considering the fact that he was massively restricted. Finally, his rhetoric on things like marijuana. We heard the fact that there's a disproportionate number of people from the African American community who are in jail. A large portion of that is because of the fact that these are the people racially targeted by police officers for things like drug searches. We think that changing the rhetoric on marijuana has been one of the reasons why change in that area has become a lot faster today than it was before. And it's one of the major ways that it's helped these communities, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think part of the reason why such a large number of Republicans were elected in 2012 who was able to block him was because he made speeches where he insulted the kind of people who voted on the other side?
Right. I mean, all the examples you talked about when he did this on the other side happened at the very tail end of his presidency, when he's sort of trying to make sure it's set up for the future, rather than the re-election that you just talked about. Your premise doesn't really work there. Because we think that before he was re-elected, he was quite willing to work with the other side, as I pointed out, where he was trying to say, okay, Congress isn't going to help me, but I'm going to work in other ways to help with the communities that I'm talking about in a way that's less aggressive. One of those are major achievements that have been ignored, right? Like he banned lobbyists from being able to work in administrations on areas that they targeted where they lobbied on, right? That's one of the ways in which he changed the way that Washington worked, one of his election promises. Yeah, he didn't fix it completely, but if you expect him to fix it completely, yeah, that's pretty sick. Secondly, don't ask, don't tell. He signed a repeal of that sort of legislation, which is one of the major reasons why we can sort of get rid of a lot of the myths around the LGBT community. One of the reasons probably why a lot more people were open to same-sex marriage than before. You also made hate crime legislation expand to cover people from LGBT plus backgrounds. So yeah, he might not have been on the Supreme Court that struck down the ban on same-sex marriage, but it doesn't mean that he didn't implicitly help change the narrative on these issues that led to those sorts of things being possible in the first place. But also on guns, he's taken executive action, despite the fact that it's unpopular, to lead to much more background checks and much more scrutiny in a way that wasn't before. But also in foreign policy, the fact that we've had changes in our relationship, like the US relationships to Cuba, changes in our relationships to Iran, of things that were massive changes to the previous status quo, were massive changes to the previous sort of position that all politicians took because it was politically safe, but rather fit in with this narrative of hope and change, of a new era of foreign policy, a new era of American politics in general. We think he's done the best possible thing he could with the restrictions that he's had. The metric should be, how has he adapted to those restrictions to keep his promises as well as he could? He must work on.
Thanks for that speech, Surya, and thanks for finishing the main speeches. We're now going to move on to the floor speeches, which means that everyone from the public has a chance to speak. To remind you, it's just there's a 3-minute speech limit. You can speak for however long you want. The gavel will bang after 30 seconds, which means that POIs are allowed. And again, after 3 minutes and 30 seconds to signal protected time. So is there anybody who would like to speak in proposition of the motion, saying that Obama has not fulfilled on his election promises? Okay, one at the front. Martin, do you want to come down?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this has been really weird. For once, we've had a debate where one side says he's broken all his promises, and then you have the other side that says he's broken all his promises, but it wasn't his fault. He was busy that day. He had laundry day. He didn't know how politics worked. He didn't know that there was another party. He didn't understand the concept of democracy. Somehow, when he went to election in a democracy where votes matter, and like Republicans probably want to have a right to have their voices heard in the bodies where they can be represented, he went, if I get to decide everything, and if no one has any voice whatsoever, I'm going to give you change you can believe in. The problem and the reason why their excuses are not legitimate is because it has undermined to what extent one can believe in change. Like, the problem is, and I think which was hinted at from Jordan, is that when you inflate a promise to such a big extent, that's a one-off, and you've betrayed a large number of people. In what way is this very specific? First of all, by making massive promises based on a race platform, he made a lot of African-American voters who previously might have cared more about issues, for instance, related to there being a big state or religion or other legitimate things, and therefore make them vote Republican, go, no, I want to prioritize this issue about discrimination which I face every day because I believe in that, and cross over to a party they thought was going to change that. The point when he does not deliver on that promise because he's not prepared to put in the work or to offer enough to the other side to make them buy that and not stand on the side of we're never going to give him any wins at all, but to make them come over to the other side, it makes the same individuals think twice when they go to vote for the same agenda. What that effectively means is that the successors to Obama, who are going to promise the same things because they are in the same party, are now less likely to be given credit. That means that he has not only failed to deliver on these promises in his tenure, this undermined the prospect of these promises being delivered in future by future presidents. So as a consequence, we see that we've got more entrenchment on those issues, and we have less belief that these issues are going to be converted into meaningful legislation. That's what happens when people lie. Amazing timing. So, in effect, I think that it is absolutely unforgivable for a person to promise things without having a political plan based on dialogue and concessions and negotiations with another side, deliver that, and in particular to make those promises on emotional issues that are likely to buy voters who otherwise did not vote or otherwise would not have voted for your party. I think at that point you are dishonest, and at that point you betrayed some of the most important issues that we have in the politics of all the world. Because of that, he's definitely lying, he's definitely morally culpable.
Thanks, Martin, for that wonderful speech. Is there anybody who would like to speak in opposition of the motion? So in favor of Obama? Yeah, back.
So I'm gonna try and put up a case for Obama here, but for some different reasons that the opposition in the formal speeches gave. In the last debate Obama had with Hillary Clinton in 2008, he said, if you're walking down the right path and you have the will to do so, you'll make progress. It's my personal belief that as a solitary promise, Obama didn't make any promises but to leave a legacy. After 8 years of Republican moderatism under Bush, right? Seeing the world's only superpower become a hotbed for lethal weapons, racial tensions, and the root of the worldwide economic disaster. How are you going to then take a position where America will become the opposite of that, right? America's meant to be leading us. Having the most guns per capita in the world is not a really good sign. So then Obama took over in 2008. The economy is destroyed worldwide, and he's taken over the most powerful country in the world with the most powerful killing force known to man, the US military. He takes over, and in 2016, he's going to lead the presidency with the USA having legalized same-sex marriage, a strengthening economy with 70 straight months of job sector growth, like provisions made into gun control, and like probably most importantly, a place where politics is no longer a centrist argument, right? Obama was elected because people thought he was a progressive. And now we're seeing a platform where someone as radical as Bernie Sanders might become president. So taking all of that into account, I believe that the only promise he made was the one that mattered, and that was one of progress. Abraham Lincoln is known as an American hero, right? He's the man who ended slavery. Well, if you look at it closer, he said to Republican peers just before signing the Abolition Act that if he had any other choice, he wouldn't do so. People don't remember a president like we're doing right now. People don't remember a president on the nitty and gritty and what did they do on this day, what did they do on this day. They remember him for his legacy. And his legacy lies as a legacy where he's passed the only promise that matters at all. And that's one of progress. And I think on that basis, Obama's like presidency, should we remember him as someone who broke all his promises? No, he passed the one promise that he agreed to pass when he was like running to become president. And that's to be the progressive that America needs for the future.
Thanks for that speech. Is there anybody who would like to speak in extension of the motion? So someone who isn't really sure what side they should be on or hasn't made up their mind yet. Anybody? You can win a bottle of port or chocolates. Yeah, over there.
Okay, so to some extent, I think we need to question exactly what we mean by promises. Because that seems to be what we kind of boiled down to in this debate. Is it something that we definitely can keep, or is it something that, you know, we just say and then if you can't actually go through with it, is that still a promise? So as has been discussed, politicians in this democracy in America need to push beyond other politicians. And this becomes impossible when you have bonkers politicians such as Trump and all sorts of others that make impossible promises that they aren't possibly going to be able to keep, but then still win people over because people tend to fall for things that they actually like to hear. So a lot of promises that are used to show what sort of beliefs politicians actually hold. So if anybody actually expects to win in an election, they have to make promises that they can't keep. But are these actually promises? Can we actually call these promises? So I just want to leave you with a question. Is it better for a politician to lie, to give an example of what sort of things they do support, to give you an idea of where on the political compass they lie, with the probability that they won't be able to do some of the things, but they will be able to do some of the things that they have done? Or does a politician tell the exact truth, keeping in mind every single calculation of what is improbable to do and impossible to do, and be at a serious disadvantage because you really aren't able to make any promise at all if you really consider every single factor that's going to be a block in what you can actually do? So, I mean, this is why politicians make so many promises. They all do. None of them can actually keep all of them, and hence some of these promises need to be seen as a way of expressing beliefs that they can try for, but it's unlikely. But yeah, based on them to be seen as expressions of beliefs rather than actual physical promises.
Thanks for that speech. I would now like to ask for a second round of floor speeches. So is there anybody who would like to speak again in proposition of the motion? Yeah, at the back, Aidan.